Welcome, everyone. Got the message that there are still people waiting to join the webinar, but we should start now. It's 9 o'clock. I'm Gabriel Games, Interregional Advisor on Organization and Development of National Statistical Systems at UNSD. I will have the pleasure to moderate this 25th webinar of a series of ongoing events hosted by the Statistics Division on the road from the World Data Forum held in Bern last year to the next one to be organized in Hangzhou, China from 24th to 27th April this year. Like the World Data Forum, the webinar series aims to share experience and open a dialogue between the global community of data producers and users, whether part of the government, the academia, the civil society, and the private sector. They seek these webinars to stimulate initiatives for data innovation and advanced technologies, mobilize high-level political and financial support, and eventually build a pathway to evidence-based monitoring for sustainable development. Our topic for today is revisiting and adapting data governance and statistical legal frameworks to the new data era. This webinar aims to discuss challenges and identify good practices in adapting national statistical legislation and governance mechanisms to promote the development of a resilient and agile national statistical system and beyond, and this is important, the whole data ecosystem, addressing users' needs for high quality, timely, and granular data. And do I have to say that now, including amid health crisis, such as this one that we have at the moment, and other disruptive disasters. Today in this webinar, we are more than, I can see already 250 participants. I welcome you all, and I'm sure that we are all very excited to listen to an impressive list of panelists who will share their insights and based experiences on the topic. We have already received many questions, and thank you very much, that have helped shape the conversation. And we have picked a few that the panelists will address later. However, the panelists will also respond to a few additional questions from the live chat in the second half of the webinar. So please send questions, but also comments to panelists at any time during the webinar via the chat window. To start us off, and in running order, I'm pleased to introduce our four panelists. First one will be Pam Dixon. She's the founder and executive director of the World Privacy Forum, a respected public interest research group and NGO. Pam is an author and researcher. She has written influential studies about data governance, health, identity, biometrics, artificial intelligence, and other topics. Our second speaker or panelist will be Aishat Shahuda. She's currently the Deputy Chief Statistician of the Maldives, but she served for 8 years as a Director of the National Bureau of Statistics before the present legal act was endorsed, means actually in July, since July. Her responsibilities lie in leadership and management of the Statistics Bureau and the development and coordination of the National Statistical System of the Maldives. Shahuda is actively involved in the formulation and implementation of the National Statistics Development Strategy and regulatory frameworks, as well as in the review of the National Statistical System. After that, we will have Siraj de Klerk. He is Chief Director, Data and Information Management at Statistics South Africa. Last panelist, but not least, Yeva Zacieste is the head of the Legal and Corporate Service Department at the Central Statistics Bureau, the National Statistical Institute of Latvia. Her background is in law, and as senior lawyer, Yeva has initiated and led the drafting of several legal acts important for the National Statistical System, including the Statistics Law, of course, which entered into force in 2016. Yeva is also responsible for negotiating on behalf of CSB any draft legislative act proposed by other state institutions which may concern the interest of the Statistical Office and the National Statistical System large. Dear panelists, do I have to remember or to tell you once again that you have broadly 7 minutes for your presentations? And let's start immediately, since we're a little bit short with time, with Pam and her interventions on adaptive and cooperative system for data privacy. Pam, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your kind invitation to speak in this webinar today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So I'm going to really be talking about two issues. I'm going to be providing some background and then moving towards some solutions, and then also issuing just a wee bit of a challenge. So let's go ahead and begin. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So one of the key issues I wanted to talk about by way of background is to really comment that the entire landscape of data governance has changed profoundly in the past years, particularly since about 2017. It hasn't just been 2017, but I wanted to give you a feel for this. So what you're looking at is actually a piece of research we have not quite published yet, but we're getting ready to. This is a global table of countries with data privacy laws. Now, these data privacy laws will have met what is considered widely to be international norms for data governance laws at the national level. And these tend to be laws that have some elements of the general data protection regulation, among other very standard parts of data governance laws, such as something called fair information practices. So if you look along the bottom of the screen, you'll see, a regional, the various regions in colors, and you'll see how the speed of the adoption of data regulation has really moved. And beginning in 2010 and then moving all the way up until 2020, where we have obviously a bit of a drop off there. But prior to that, you see a really very significant advancement throughout jurisdictions for data governance regulations at the national level. Next slide, please. All right, so this just gives you a little bit of a closer look at the regions we're talking about. So if you look at all of the jurisdictions and you really only count the jurisdictions that have either GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, or laws that are very similar to GDPR, you come up with approximately 145 jurisdictions across the world. And you can see the map of what that looks like. That is a very significant change from, for example, 20 years ago. And it is this change and the ubiquity of certain GDPR principles that has really impacted NSOs. And next slide, please. Okay, so what I wanted to really discuss is some of the tensions that the slide that you just saw created. So let's start with the first issue. If you look at the text of the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, what you'll find is that national statistical organizations are derogated or exempted from that language. This on its surface seems like it would be a really great thing. What that would have meant back in 2018 is that NSOs had the opportunity to go and do their work unhindered by a cumbersome regulation that could have posed some obstacles. That was really the initial read. However, there have been some unanticipated tensions that have actually arisen because of those derogations. And what has ended up happening in practice is that in some jurisdictions, not all, but some, actually many, what you're seeing is that the data protection authorities, which are set in these 145 jurisdictions, they're tasked with enforcing the national data privacy or data governance, data protection law. And as a result of this action, their enforcement authority and a very formal bureau related to data uses, what we're seeing is that the NSOs tend to have been left off the ledger a bit. So the data protection authorities, in some cases, are taking more and more leadership over data policy. So I think that right there has created enormous tensions. Some of them are subtle and unspoken. Others are more overt. However, there is a way through this, and that is what I want to now turn to talk more about the solutions. So we've been looking at what would solve this problem and what are the use cases that show how solutions might work. And we've found two pathways forward, and then I'd like to suggest a third thing that might be helpful. Okay, so first and foremost, a whole of government approach where possible is incredibly important. In looking at what this might look like, something has become quite clear, and that is context matters. It matters a lot. There are development contexts where not everything is going to work. There are legislative frameworks that may not be adaptable. In other cases, maybe the government is open to a whole-scale kind of reintegration of NSOs and data uses across the government. And that's really the best case scenario. So two very excellent examples I can cite for you is one is Canada and the other is New Zealand. They've taken very, very different approaches to this. In Canada, you see deep principles that run across all of the data stakeholders in government. In New Zealand, you also see now legislative frameworks that are running across, inclusive of the stakeholders, the data stakeholders in government. And when this whole of government approach happens, what you'll see is that there is a collaborative, cooperative relationships. It is not a warfare relationship. It is very cooperative and the stakeholders have equal say. And in this way, NSOs can bring all of their statistical knowledge to bear. And this is very important. Something that I wanted to mention, and I'm being wary of time, but something I wanted to mention is that data protection authorities are very good at enforcement, but they're not quite as good as measuring. They can measure enforcement, but there is an extraordinary gap right now. And I believe this would be an incredible opportunity for NSOs, which is this. We need methods to measure the effectiveness of governance regimes. This is a profound lack in the data privacy, the data governance realm, and I do believe it's something that the NSOs can contribute very meaningfully to. We know that not every jurisdiction is going to be able to adapt very broad legislative frameworks across the board. In those instances, it is possible to choose focused areas of policy to create an integrated vertical. And a great example of this is what can be done with national AI policies. So instead of just handing that policy over primarily to data protection authorities, they are a very important stakeholder, but that is an opportunity to identify and gather all of the stakeholders together and to create an integrated framework just in that vertical. And in this way, the various contexts that cultural, political, and legal contexts that NSOs are in, they can sandbox, as it were, some of this integration and try different things and see what works. So these are my initial comments, and I look forward to the rest of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam. Very interesting. I like very much, I mean, your approach, and also warning us that data protection is not all about the data protection authority, and you need also specialists, I mean, data stakeholders, to sit together with the data protection authority to govern the national data ecosystem. And maybe later you can tell us a little bit more about the conflict or not between the data protection laws and the statistical legislation that we have in different countries, and how each other could be supportive. Thank you very much, Pam. And now we can go to the next the second short intervention with Shauda sharing the Maldives experience in modernizing the national statistical legislation. Please, Shauda, the floor is yours. Thank you,
Gabriel. It's a pleasure to be here. In the case of Maldives, we recently adopted our statistics law in July of this year. And right now, can you show my slide, please? Yeah. So right now we have established the Maldives Bureau of Statistics, previously the National Bureau of Statistics. We are still under the Ministry of Planning, but we have this legal framework in place right now, and we have a new statistician, chief statistician that is appointed by the president. And this statistics law we have done based on a lot of experience we had previously based on the statistics regulation that was in place. So based on those experiences, and when we had the National Statistical System review that was conducted by UNSD and UNESCAP, based on this global review type frameworks. So it was a very extensive review, and special focus was given for the legislation aspects. And based on those comments and the feedback and the guidance we got from the statistics legislation, that general law for the official statistics, it was looked at extensively in trying to accommodate the modernization aspects. And we also have incorporated the UN fundamental principles of official statistics into the law. So in that aspect, we have a lot of authority to like move forward in the previously challenged areas when we had the statistics regulation. Next slide, please. Yeah, so now with the new act, we have a, as I mentioned, we have a new chief statistician and we have a statistical council. So that is representation from users, which was something that we did not have before. In addition to the government data producers, we have the like private sector representation, civil society representation, as well as the academia represented in the statistical council. And based on this, in order to implement the statistics law, now we are working on the regulations. Lot of regulations are needed to try and implement this statistics law properly. And for that, one of the things that we have included and come up with a national strategy for the development of our statistics in the long term. So it's it also incorporates a lot of plans and activities on how to implement these regulations properly. Next slide, please. Yeah, so under the Statistics Act, we have included the use of non-traditional data sources for the compilation of statistics and indicators. It gives us the authority to access administrative data and also explore opportunities for new data sources, modernize the national statistical system, and also develop statistical registers that we using the administrative data sources and combining it with other statistical data that we collect from censuses, surveys. So as such, I would say that we have got a lot of rights, legal rights for the National Bureau of Statistics and the national statistical system as a whole to function in a much like effective way than we had before. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I said, we are trying to use this to improve the statistical standards, establishing statistical standards and data quality frameworks is still something that is pending, and it's something that we are going to focus a lot in going forward, and also in building capacity within our organization, within the Maldives Bureau of Statistics, as well as the other producers of statistical agencies in the statistical system. Previously, we did not have much clarity on who are the players in the national statistical system. But in this, with this law, we have used new definition on how to define the players in the national statistical system. It includes Maldives Bureau of Statistics and other producers of statistics in the country. So we have the decentralized statistical system, and improving the administrative data collected by the different agencies is something that is very important, we feel, because that is where we see many of the SDGs even we can produce if we invest more in improving our administrative data and make it usable for statistical production. So going forward, investing in the new alternative data sources, big data, citizen science, some of the pilots we have already done prior to the Statistics Act. And at the time we faced some challenges as well in data access. So that's in building partnerships is something that is really important. And I think the capacity and regulations that we will need to implement the statistics law is something that is most important right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shahuda, for this presentation. When we look at your presentation, actually, the law started with the assessment of the National Statistical System, a review of the system in 2017, and the law was endorsed in 2021. But it takes time, of course, to think what is the national statistical system we want. But that's the point when we start drafting a law, right? If I get it correctly from your presentation, and how the national statistical system is going to interact, to partner with the rest of the national data community. Thank you very much, and congratulations for the endorsement of your recent endorsement of your law. We will have the opportunity to discuss that later on with the questions that came from the participants. Now, I mean, I will now give the floor to our third panelist, Siraj, that will present the South African experience. Please, Siraj, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairperson. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So the current statistics legislation that we operate under is the Statistics Act of 1999. This act was quite forward-looking. It served South Africa well for at least a decade or more. It anticipated future statistical needs. It made provision for the establishment of the National Statistical System and served as an excellent basis for official statistics. However, in 2010, Statista embarked on a new strategic direction with a specific emphasis on implementing the NSS. And as we tried to do this, we found there were certain deficiencies in the Act of 1999. In particular, the coordination function of the Statistician General in the National Statistics System was rather limited. Access to data at other organs of state was also limited. And then in 2013, we had the emergence of new legislation entitled the Protection of Personal Information Act that complicated things a little bit for us. And that's when the process of overhauling the Statistics Act began. In South Africa in particular, the ability for the Statistician General to to issue regulations regarding what data is collected, how it is processed, what quality it should be. We found the legislation of 99 rather weak in those respects, and that motivated us to make a change. Next slide. This was the journey we went on starting in 2010. We won't go through all of the details, but by the end of 2019, we were ready to enact the new legislation. Unfortunately, we were overtaken by events. COVID happened shortly thereafter, and the entire 2020 was lost to us. But something important arose in 2019. The Protection of Personal Information Act, a real effort was made to implement it. The information regulator was appointed that had serious powers to sanction individuals for breach of what is in the Act. And Statins had to a little bit go back to the drawing board and engage on a consultation process with the information regulator and engage with the legislation of the Protection of Personal Information Act and how it related to the work of Stats SA and the National Statistical System in particular. Next slide. So now we're going to come to some of the challenges and opportunities. If you're going to embark on a process of changing the legislation, we just need to be aware this is a cumbersome and time-consuming process. And if one is going to do this, then be exhaustive in one's approach. An opportunity to change the legislation is an opportunity to really address all of your statistical needs in one fell swoop. And so you don't approach it sort of in a piecemeal approach, amending the legislation here and there. And so we really had to look at the legislation in its entirety, who it impacted, the other actors in the data ecosystem that it impacted, and what our relationship with them would be or should be going forward. Another challenge is that of confidentiality. It is enshrined in the statistical legislation as well as in the privacy legislation. But we discovered that once you as an NSO demonstrate that you take that seriously and that you've got proper safeguards in place and protocols and processes and procedures, then it builds a lot of trust between the NSO and other actors in the data ecosystem. You really enhance your reputation as a diligent custodian of not only data, but private information of the people of the country as well. Thirdly, a challenge is sometimes as an NSO, we think that we operate in a vacuum and we just want to do and get on with our work. But we also need to become familiar with the legislation that other actors derive their mandates from. And then we had to pour over that legislation, understand it, what is their role, what is the importance of their work. And so once we started engaging and the consultation started, as an NSO, we gained a lot of respect for the work that we do, and we in turn gained a lot of respect for the work that they do and how the data they have can contribute to the National Statistical System and serve as a basis for official statistics. It's also a challenge to engage other actors in the data ecosystem, especially if there are no protocols in place, you've never done it before, who does what. In the beginning, we had this attitude that, our legislation supersedes their legislation. And that kind of confrontational or adversarial approach is not productive, we found. Next slide, please. And so some of the good practices, make sure that if we want to access data, make sure that this is supported in law. Your legislation could include formal agreements, mention formal agreements such as MOUs, service level agreements. In our legislation, we actually specifically mention automated or promote automated data sharing. And once we demonstrate how we comply with the statistics legislation as well as the protection of privacy and private information, we found that other actors in the system are much more open to working with us. Final slide, please. And then these agreements that we have in place, MOUs and service level agreements, they have to address specific issues. And these are what we found were good practices. You must identify if the data that is to be shared or accessed is unit record level or aggregated data. Be specific. What is the data to be used for? What metadata elements have to accompany the data that you seek? Describe in detail or develop a change protocol for when data sharing processes are subject to changes. For instance, upgrading of your ICT infrastructure, changes to definition, or changes in metadata, or the recording of metadata. And then identify responsible parties for each organization, and then specify data sharing frequency and dates. And the outcome of this approach has resulted in StatsSA now being nominated by other organs of state to become a custodian of government data. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Siraj. You answered a few. I mean, you made beautifully the bridge between the presentation we had just before and the next one. Thank you very much. It's important to see also in your presentation that without a strong NSO coordinating a trusted national statistical system, there is no governance or sound governance of the national data ecosystem. So we need first, according to your presentation, to build up a strong National Statistical Office and a strong National Statistical System. We will be able to discuss that a little bit further later on, but also something that is important, and we hear it from time to time, it is important that the law supports data access and data exchange. We hear sometimes it's not needed. I mean, what is not forbidden is then allowed, but supporting this is a point that is important. Thank you very much for your presentation, Siraj. And we will go now to our last panelist, Jeva Zaceste. She will share the Latvian experience on legal frameworks and how a national statistical agency can, or maybe even should, steer its modernization. Please, Jeva, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me on this panel. When I was thinking about today's topic, about plethora of information on this subject and what I can specifically tell you about, I decided to speak about small things and some legal basics. So let me flesh out a couple of things. A couple of things and examples that my institution has encountered in our journey of drafting and applying statistics law, and finding out our place in the system, in the regulatory framework, and in the new data ecosystem as a whole. First, when we were drafting statistics law, or when we are really involved in drafting any other legal act, we try to draft a good law, considering the elements of the principle of the good legislation. So what is good law? Good law is concise and actually also exhaustive. As Siraj put it, the statistics law should address all statistical needs in one fell swoop. Those are very good words. So the good law is concise, especially in our legal system. It can be applied to any situation in life through intelligent, reasonable, methodical, and educated interpretation. Whether new technologies are introduced or new data sources emerges, the existing statistical provisions should be sufficient to enable an organization to take advantage of new opportunities. And actually, we do have evidence. We saw that in the beginning of the pandemics, that many NSI could access data and produce new statistics based on existing legal framework with no issues. So the legal interpretation is a tool every statistician must be aware of and not afraid of. So what we are doing in our office, we are trying to educate our staff on these interpretation methods and tools. Second point, our office, we don't expect that everyone must know and understand statistics law or official statistics in general. It took us a lot of effort even before the law was adopted to educate other state institutions on about statistics in general. And actually, we still do that. We are educating institutions on official statistics. A collaboration is a key with key partners at the earliest stage of drafting any legal act is of course a key. In this way, actually, we developed a stable relationship with the data protection officer. When we are stuck in our negotiations with private or public administrative data owners, we are more than happy to guide them to the data protection officer to have some reassurance or opinion. And actually, we are not afraid that the outcome can be bad because we have already established our relationship with the data protection officer. We have shared understanding of the essence of statistical production and of statistics law. So the third point is that statistics law cannot be a universal law, if I may say so, in which you will put all the necessary regulation and live peacefully and quietly ever after. It is a part of a legal system, and legal system is a living organism. It changes, it develops, and we have to be agile in using statistics law alongside other laws. Previously, we had to work with our staff to get this understanding across. With this mindset or approach, this entails that my office should look around and advocate for statistical interests in other laws. Our principle is that we don't wait for things to happen, we make things happen. We are very fortunate in Latvia that since mid-90s or about 2000, we have had a single working environment for the development and harmonization of draft legal acts. It's a part of the lawmaking process. Every single individual can have a say in lawmaking directly. Not many individuals use that, but this system gives us, NSI, enormous power to impact different draft legal acts. Usually, we try to incorporate our interests by objecting to the draft legal act because it's a procedure, and we do that a lot. The best part is that the responsible ministry for the draft legal act cannot ignore us. They have to achieve compromise with us. And even if we don't achieve a compromise, our dispute then is resolved at the next stage of this lawmaking process. The worst part is that we have to check the system daily because there is a flow of draft legal acts, and you have just 2 weeks in which you have to decide whether you are going to object and no, and you have to build your case. So let me give you the most recent example on this issue. In the regulation of European Union and in our law, we have a legal norm stating that NSI shall be consulted on and involved in the initial design, subsequent development, and discontinuation of administrative records built up and maintained by other bodies. So how can you do that? How can you set up these mechanisms that everybody consults you? Is it feasible to set a
Mind
mechanism?
the 7 minutes, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah. So actually, this lawmaking system allowed us to object to, there was a legal act which was submitted by the regional ministry, stating that every state institution must submit their application for changes in system to the Ministry of Regional Development. And we objected and said, we also want that you submit this application with us. So the rest is part. So we did this, and now every application is also submitted to us and approved by a National Statistical Institute. And the same goes with access to pseudonymized mobile phone location data and some medical records. So we are using system to get what we want. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva, for this presentation, and also to explain to us that lawyers need to understand what statistics is about, but statisticians should also understand what legislation is about. And it's not always easy to bridge these two groups. And this is actually your job, Eva, if I'm correct, to speak to these two groups of people that believe that they are very important, and they are, of course, in our everyday life, but also how important it is for the National Statistical Office to be proactive, not only in the development of the statistical legislation, but any other legislation that may interfere positively or negatively with the National Statistical Law. So thank you very much, Eva, for this presentation. And in order to make the webinar a little bit, we have now something like half an hour for discussion and questions. But in order to make the webinar a little bit more interactive, in particular between the panelists, I will propose that each of you panelists, if you wish, you have 1 minute to actually make a comment on the presentation of one of the other colleagues that spoke also now with you. So I don't know if there is one who would like to start with a short intervention. Again, you don't have to, and you have 1 minute. Thank you. So who wants to start here?
Oh, can I start as the last one?
Okay, yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So there were a lot of things that resonated with me from today's presentation, and I will start with Siraj. Show your credibility to other partners. That's very important. I think that's the most important thing. And I didn't say anything about how we act in our data ecosystem, but that's the way how we are working with our partners. We are showing our credibility. From Shahad's presentation, innovating regulations in the law is a way to go, and good luck to Maldives. And from Pam's presentation, context, culture, and legal system really matters, and you have to know how to navigate through all these environments. And once again, common rules throughout the whole state administration concerning data management, it's very important. We do have these rules, and it helps enormously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva.
I follow on.
Yes, go, Pam. It's Pam, right, Pam? Yeah,
Yes,
go ahead, Pam.
Okay, so I'm going to do this very quickly if I possibly can. So I really, really enjoyed the presentation on Latvia. I think it's a great case study on how you can, over time, integrate an NSI or NSO into the legal frameworks. They are doing exactly what they should be doing. It's a really brave and really smart strategy. I really loved what the Maldives said in terms of you really need to address the legal basis of using data sets, because going forward, the private sector is going to have a lot of data sets that NSOs may want to use, but they have to have a legal framework that enables them to utilize that with the NSOs. And I think that's very important. The presentation from South Africa was really fascinating, and there was something that drew my attention, which is the automated data sharing. this is a deeply contested area in data protection legislation. I'll just tell you that right now. Even DPAs do not agree on it. However, I do see that real-time data ecosystems are on the way. We are not prepared. I don't know really very many situations that are prepared. So I think this gives us something really good to think about and to prepare policy on and legal frameworks for. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam, for these interventions. Of course, we also all understand, Pam, that what you're mentioning here and the role of a National Statistical Office in being proactive depends on two main criteria. The first one is actually the fact that the Statistical Office is consulted, and this does not happen everywhere, but we come back to credibility, trust, and professionalism. If there is professionalism, trust, and credibility, the Statistical Office is consulted. The second one is an issue of resources. You need to have a legal expert in the National Statistical Office taking care of that and consulting the colleagues in the office to tell them, hello, there is something happening there. Do you think this is a good move or not? And of course, all countries, in particular small islands developing states, don't have, unfortunately, these resources. But thank you very much for this intervention. I'm only the moderator, but I just wanted to bring it so that we'll clearly understand that there is something we have to work on. Does someone else want to intervene here? I mean, quickly, and then otherwise we can go to the question that were addressed to you in advance. Please, I mean, another one?
Go next.
Siraj?
Yeah.
Siraj,
yes. Yeah. I think, as Stats is saying, we missed the trick. And the trick is what Latvia is doing. We have a process where before any legislation is enacted, there is an opportunity for interested parties to object, comment on, and we have failed to take advantage of this. And so later legislation came into effect that worked against the Statistics Office. And I think this is something that we will seriously consider implementing going forward. And then in terms of the Maldives, the law is always the right place to start, but it's only a start. And we've discovered painfully in our own experiences, just because something is in law doesn't mean it's going to happen. And so you actually have to put a process in place to implement the power that the law gives you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Siraj. This was a very important point. The law is a starting point, and it's true that we tend actually to advocate for the law and partner with our different stakeholders at the moment when we are drafting the law. But once the law is endorsed, we forget them, and we still need to explain to them what is the law all about and how we're going to implement it. Thank you very much, Siraj. That was a very important point. I don't know if Shahuda, you want to say a few words.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed all the presentations. It was very informative, especially in the case of Maldives when we don't have a data protection act yet. So I was very interested in what Pam suggested about the whole of government approach and what need to be carefully looked into. And from like Eva's presentation, I also said came like you don't wait for things to happen. Yeah, you have to make it happen. So these are the types of things. And during our legal framework also, we had a lot of communication with the legal Attorney General's office, because some of the terminologies we have is like they don't need to understand. So it's we had to like elaborate on many of the concepts as well, even during the regulation phase. And from the South Africa, I think what Pam suggested, this automated data exchange was something I was thinking that is something that we didn't think of. So those are the things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shahuda, for your very frank and open comments, also about your situation, right, where you stand, and for looking actually very objectively to your situation. Thank you. For the question, let's go now. Move to the question, I think, because we are going to be late. Some of them actually you have already addressed rather well during your presentation. So I'm trying a little bit to refilter what we have done, just for you to know that these questions came to us. We try to merge them, to filter them, to reformulate them, and here they are. Maybe I will start with a question to Yeva or maybe Siraj. I mean, even though you have already explained a little bit that, how does the new data era that arises from the data revolution challenge the data governance role of the National Statistical Office? And how shall this be addressed in the legal frameworks? Do you have a few best practices and examples, but also challenges to share? I believe in your both presentation, so Yeva and Siraj, I mean, you discussed that, but do you have something very quickly to add there?
Nothing in addition to what we've already mentioned.
Exactly, right? I don't know, Yeva, do you have something more? You see that actually with the presentation, you address these questions very well, right? So
but
yeah,
actually,
Yeva, go ahead.
yeah,
Yes?
one thing I could mention, what I'm missing with this whole system, new data ecosystem, we have a lot of legal acts in place in Latvia governing IT structures, open data, and so on. But what we are missing is an effective enforcement mechanism. If somebody is stuck somewhere in some rabbit hole and you can't move forward and backward, you need a good enforcement mechanism. How can you get out of your problems? And currently we do have kind of a mechanism, but it's not very effective. So in this whole system, I would think about an effective enforcement mechanism. That's all. Thank you.
I respond to that.
Go ahead. Yes, I expected you to come.
So I really like that comment, and I think it's very astute. This is something that's not been broadly addressed yet, and it's a very, very proper thing to be thinking about. So in data protection and broad data governance legislation, the enforcement is built in with data protection authorities. That being said, the role was never conceived of as a whole of government enforcement mechanism, and it isn't. It is very narrow in many, many important respects. So the question of enforcement of the statistical offices, it's quite central. But a way forward is also to install an auditor, a very formal auditing process. No, I believe NSOs will have varying frameworks for this, but I do think that that would be very effective. And if it is made independent enough within the statistical institution, I think that this will be a very good step forward.
Thank you very much, Pam. And just very quickly, as you know, I mean, when it comes to the National Statistical Systems, or the producer of official statistics, there is in general in countries a body that plays this role, which is the Advisory Statistical Council, that is there to represent the interest of the users and also to check if all members of the system are implementing the fundamental principles correctly, right? So maybe one thing we could discuss further, but not today, is that could we establish such a group, or could this group actually extend its prerogative on this dimension, I mean, on the activities of the data ecosystem? Thank you very much, Pam. I have here another question for you, but I have the feeling that you answered already that question in your presentation. I will nevertheless read it. Data privacy is a core principle for instilling trust in data governance. It was said not only by you. How can this principle address the need for granular data and simultaneously secure confidentiality of the respondent or the observation unit, in particular from the danger of malicious large-scale intrusion and surveillance? Pam, I mean, do you have something to add there?
Yes, I can add something there. So this is obviously, data misuse is a really big problem across all data ecosystems, but it's made more complex for statistical organizations. Here's the thing. Privacy is definitely a sub-part of data governance, but it is only part. We have come to understand, particularly for national statistical institutions and organizations, that also issues such as inclusion and exclusion are also important for trust. So if you have an NSO that's excluded a certain group of people from the statistics, or perhaps gender is not disaggregate, etc., these are all issues relating to inclusion and exclusion. And I would argue these are as important as privacy. So I think that we've got to include privacy in the calculus and also broaden it. And each context will be different. But I think that something to think about is how confidentiality is viewed quite differently in the privacy context and then in the statistical context. So in the privacy context, for example, you'll have one of the very most high examples of confidentiality in the privacy context is in human subject medical research. There are global norms around this that stem from many years ago. In the US, it's called the Common Rule. It has different names in different jurisdictions. But the confidentiality is based on consent and then handling identifiable data, but not releasing it in identifiable form. The guidance does not really talk about statistics per se, but if you look at statistical organizations, national statistical organizations, you really have an approach where you're really talking about de-identification, re-identification, aggregation, and a lot of very, very detailed nuance. And I think that were these two worlds to meet, we would have the best of all, because the approaches are actually similar, but quite different.
Thank you very much, Pam. And now I have a question. I'm trying to mix the questions that are coming now from the chat, and at the same time these one that came earlier. Maybe for Shauda, the Maldives. You have now this new statistical legislation that basically you told us will facilitate the access to administrative data, but also eventually to other data sources like big data and citizen-generated data. Now that you have the law, how are you using this law to justify the fact that you have access to the data, and what are the main challenges that are still remaining when you are asking to get access to these data? Can you tell us a few words?
Thank you, Gabriel. Right now, we have not started actually implementing it in terms of this big data and citizen-generated data as such, but we are trying to establish strong like implementation rules so that we are like more clear on how to go about it. But we have in the plans to try and have collaborations with the agencies. So for everything, there's going to be like South Africa has highlighted why do we need this data, and then how we can work together to like make the best use of this information and the confidentiality clauses. We have very strong confidentiality, like individual data protection, I mean, in the statistics law. So as such, we have in our statistics plan this big data and new data sources. So right now we have plans to pilot it mostly, and then collaboratively, I think slowly we have to move forward in these areas.
Thank you very much, Shauda. It's interesting what you're saying, right? The statistical law is there to secure the interest first of the users so that they get the right statistics they need to take decision, and at the same time to protect confidentiality from the respondents, including also the data providers, so the administration and other big data providers. The law is not first for the National Statistical Office, but to protect both ends of the production process of the statistics. Of course, the Statistical Office is a big player in between, and that's why you are there also for the implementation and the management of the law. Thank you very much. If I go to the next question, what are the experience of statistical agencies in developing and implementing their data stewardship role? How shall statistical agencies communicate about their new role? So communicate about the new role, partner and share in a non-conflictual way responsibility with other important private and public data competence, I call them competence centers, that may exist within your country outside the National Statistical Office. Do you have a few good practices and examples? I had in mind when I got this question to ask Siraj to tell us more about that, also because I know that in South Africa, very important statistics, the national accounts, are not produced by the National Statistical Office, but by the central bank. How is it possible then to manage to take this authority as a data stewardship in your country when you have so big other, let's call them animals, in your data ecosystem? Siraj, do you want to answer, or do you feel that you already provided all the answers to that question?
Well, I'm not going to focus on the national accounts because the central bank produces, in fact, the Statistics Office produces the demand side of the GDP and the bank, the supply side. So that's how we operate at Stats SA in South Africa. However, with regards to other data players in the ecosystem, we have the information regulator. And the information regulator has a lot of power. They have the ability to sanction individuals, organizations, impose hefty fines. And so what Stats SA did, we subjected ourselves voluntarily to the information regulator to examine our practices and procedures to determine whether we are in full compliance with what the legislation says. So the legislation has 8 conditions for exemption that can be granted to organizations, and we had to write documents and submit them and to have them analyzed, and eventually we were found to be in compliance with all of the 8 conditions that the information regulator required of a responsible steward. And so that has made things a lot easier for us to do the work of a statistics office in South Africa.
I follow on to that comment.
Gabriel is muted.
Sorry, very important element, of course, when it comes also to the trust, right? You have proved that you comply with the 8 conditions that are there. And this is an important point. Pam, please.
Yes, so to follow on to that.
We have a few other questions, yeah.
Yes, to follow on to that, it's a really important point, actually. So when the GDPR passed in Europe, NSOs were given broad exemptions, and the South Africa approach to address this squarely and head on and to submit to those regulations instead of avoid them is very productive. It's frightening, but it's productive, and I would guess, we need to hear from you, but I would guess that this really increased confidence and really made the NSO a very key stakeholder, and a lot of the tensions would have been released by just simply facing this reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam. That's such an interesting point, right? They are not excluded de facto, right? They have a possibility to apply for the exclusion, and they have to go through a list of criteria. And if they succeed, then they are excluded, but for good reasons. Thank you very much, Pam. I think this is a very important point. And another one that I have here is a question that was prepared also, is that, is a sound legal framework sufficient to secure the data stewardship role of a National Statistical Office? Are there other models where the data steward is not the NSO? So, I mean, this is a little bit, is the law sufficient to give this role to the National Statistical Office? But by the way, are there also other models where the National Statistical Office is not the data steward? Pros, cons, please go ahead. Yeva, maybe first.
Yeah, maybe I can add here something. In Latvia, we are not indeed the data stewards, and actually we have decided on our own that we cannot have a leading role in this field. And what we mean by that is that, first of all, a big part of the whole system is infrastructure. Setting up infrastructure, maintaining it, breaking old infrastructure, and we don't have guts and human resources to do that. So that's why we don't have a leading role here. But of course, we have to find our comparative advantages. What are what are our comparative advantages? And first, this may sound a little trivial, but we know more about data ecosystem than the responsible line ministry. And thanks to different task forces, working groups at the UN and European level and their work on this issue, we are capitalizing on that. We're promoting ideas of how the system should work, how we see our role. We are throwing ideas here and there. And actually what we are doing, we are promoting ourselves. The self-marketing, I think, is very crucial. They first of all notice you, they start to listen to you, and they involve you in decision making. And the second point is that, of course, our data processing expertise can be compared with just a few organizations in our state administration. So we are capitalizing on that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. It was a very good intervention in the way that you promote and advocate actually for an open data ecosystem, but you are not the steward of this data ecosystem. I'm not sure I understood who is the steward. Is there really a steward, or is that shared between a certain number of organizations?
Actually, we do have a sort of steward, and we are moving towards a centralized system, and the responsible institution will be the Regional Development Ministry, because the IT, digital transformation, and all these things are under their responsibility. So they will be kind of data stewards.
Okay, thank you very much, Eva. Maybe someone else would like to intervene there on that point.
Follow on very briefly.
Very briefly, yeah.
So very briefly, there's law on the books and then there's law on the ground. And what really matters is both. But if you have a law on the books that names a data steward, but you are very active, as Latvia is, then you've got law on the ground that is really going to work. So, I mean, this is very helpful in areas where you can't necessarily restructure a government. You find out and work wherever you can. And I think this is a very important way to proceed forward.
Thank you very much, Pam. So actually the lesson learned here is that the National Statistical Office does not have to be systematically the data steward. There are other roles for the National Statistical Office to promote actually an open national data ecosystem. Thank you very much. And then I would, if we can move, I don't know, I mean, to the last question. And for me, I mean, representing an international organization, it's an important one. How could a global data governance framework support, guide, and inform countries to transform and modernize their legal frameworks and data governance mechanisms to embrace digital technologies and data innovation for the public good, leaving no one behind? How could the international statistical community support such initiatives? Are such initiatives already there? Please go ahead. I mean, who wants to speak first?
Okay, I'll be very brief so others have time. So I just have three very quick things. Number one, I believe NSOs, no matter where they are, well, in terms of a global approach, we have to figure out how to measure performance. We're talking today about measuring basically governance or measuring you know, how things are governed and adapting to that, but we need to measure it. So at the end of a year, so let's say there's a new statistics law or an old statistics law, each year there should be able to be a report on how this has been effectuated. Statistics or New Zealand conducted a government-wide audit of their use of algorithms. It's an absolutely fascinating document. I learned so much from it. It's this kind of thing that measures, and this is what we need. We don't have it. Also, I think collaboration, teaching people how to collaborate across different ministries and ecosystems within governments. It's a skill that can be learned. And then, of course, really teaching governments how to understand regional and national level NSO activities would be really helpful. I think there is a lack of education about that. And I do think this is how a multilateral can really help. And then, of course, to coordinate stakeholders and to create really robust dialogues.
Thank you very much, Pam. Thank you. I mean, others, maybe also these one representing the countries. How could we, international community, international organizations, help you?
I think, Gabriel, if there was the development of a broad set of principles regarding data governance, and then expand on those principles, and countries then take those principles and say, okay, how do I apply this in my context in South Africa? That could be a very good starting point for some of us.
Thank you very much, Siraj. And it's well aligned with what we heard before. So maybe we could start first with some principles on governance of national data communities, and then have an international team of experts that could go, when the country requested, that could go to the country and actually assess that country, the usage, I mean, the use and the governance of the national data ecosystem again, these principles that have been developed and eventually endorsed by the international community. Is that correct? Yes. So I don't know, Yeva, do you want to say something? Shauda also, probably, the countries on that point? How can we help you? How can you
I
help
will
the
be,
other countries?
I'll be very short and philosophical. I can just echo everything you said, all you said. But philosophical remark is about that international fora gives at least me inspiration to move forward with fresh ideas, and the fresh ideas come from these international meetings, task force, whatever. It helps a lot because we are on the periphery. Latvia is a small country. It's our curse, but our advantage. So international environment is very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yeva, for your intervention. Shauda, do you want to say a few words about that? How can we help you to better govern?
Yeah, for a small country with like limited statistical capacity, for us, the training and capacity building is the most important. I think it's critical because even within the country, in the private sector or the academia, also this like we don't have this capacity. So at the international level, a lot of guidance and capacity building is the key. Right now, the handbook, that organization's handbook is also something that we refer to a lot. So, and the collaboratives, administrative data collaborative, this big data, like what you are doing in the UN. So there are a lot of things that now we can like look for guidance, but the capacity is critical, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard. And it was very important also to mention a few initiatives that have been launched by UNSD, but also others. I mean, like regional commissions, for example, on the governance of data ecosystems, on the use of new data sources for the production of statistics. You mentioned, for example, big data. I mean, by UNSD. I mean, you know, also the collaborative. You mentioned the collaborative on administrative data, which is a very important one. I still believe, I personally now, if I can, as moderator, that it's a gold mine of information, administrative data, and it's very a low-hanging fruit. And this is probably for developing countries and small islands, maybe the first step, I mean, to get access to these data, to improve actually the coverage and the quality of official statistics. Thank you very much for that. May I ask all of you, the panelists, to share your email address in the chat box. We have received this request many times. So please, instead of running after all these participants, I have seen that a while we were over 400 participants. So can you please share your email address there? It will be your problem then to filter all the requests you are going to get. But I take this is a good opportunity to thank you, because we had these 400 participants because of the quality of the panelists, the quality of your intervention. I would like to thank Pam Dixon, Executive Director from the World Privacy Forum. I would like to thank Aisha Chauda, Deputy Chief Statistician, Maldives Bureau of Statistics. I would like to thank Siraj de Klerk, the Chief Director, Data and Information Management, Statistics South Africa, and of course, Yeva Dasheste, Director, Legal and Corporate Services Department, Central Statistical Bureau of Latvia. We will see if one day or another we will have a follow-up to this discussion. I think there are a lot of points that we could further discuss, exchange, and learn from our good practices and our challenges. But I would like also to take this opportunity to thank Yin and Fariel that have been, of course, very important as the organizer of this webinar. My life was very easy. Actually, I had just to speak to you, and you know that I like to speak. So that's not an issue for me. Thank you very much for that. And you can find us on Twitter, UN Data Forum, hashtag UN Data Forum. So please consult, go there, read more. We will continue to interact, to partner with you also in the future. My email address, in case you also have it, is gamesg@un.org. I'm working a lot with countries in developing the national statistical laws in order to support the development of a modern national statistical system. So thank you very much, everybody. I think with that, we are done. We are 2 minutes late. I'm very, very sorry for this, but I wish you all a good night, a good evening, good afternoon, or a good rest of the day. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you
everybody.
very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thank you so much, everyone.